A quorum being present, the committee will come to order. Before we proceed with this morning's hearing, I'd like to recognize Mr. Hinojosa for an announcement.
Thank you, Chairman Klein. It is a privilege, and I want to welcome our newest member to the Education Committee, Congressman Mark Pocan, who represents Wisconsin's 2nd District, is filling the vacancy on this committee left by Congressman John Yarmouth, who is now on the Energy and Commerce Committee. Congressman Pocan is tailor-made for working on this committee. He is a small business owner, and he is a union member. He knows how to work across political divides, and he knows how to legislate. He served 7 terms in the Wisconsin State Assembly. His successes earned him the Best Legislator Award from Milwaukee Magazine. This is Congressman Pocan's first term in the House of Representatives, and he has already proven to be a strong voice for students and working families from his home state and across the country. With his assignment to this committee, I am submitting Senior Democratic Member Miller's letter announcing the new subcommittee assignments for Democratic members. And Congresswoman Wilson will be moving from Early Childhood to the Higher Ed Subcommittee. Congresswoman Bonamici will be moving from Workforce Protections to the Help Subcommittee. And Congressman Pocan will be joining the Early Childhood and Workforce Protections Subcommittee. I urge all my colleagues to join me in welcoming Congressman Pocan.
Will the gentleman yield for a moment? Will the gentleman yield?
Yes, I yield to you.
I'd like to join in welcoming my colleague, who I'm very happy as a member of this committee, my colleague from Wisconsin, who represents, has within his district one of the great educational institutions really in the world, the University of Wisconsin. It's internationally famous in many areas, and I suspect that may be one of his priorities, and we look forward to working together on helping the university.
Mr. Pocan, I'd like to yield time to you.
Sure. I just want to say thank you very much. Looking forward to serving on the committee, and looking forward to the work we have to do. It's ahead of us. Thank you very much.
That's the briefest speech I've ever heard. Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent that this letter advising the chairman of our revised subcommittee assignments be included in the record.
Without objection.
Okay, I think this is, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Mr. Pocan, I also welcome you to the Committee on Education and the Workforce. I know you, like I and Mr. Petri, are looking forward to a football game on Saturday. I have different expectations, I'm sure, than you do, but we're glad to have you. I'd like to thank our witnesses for joining us today. We look forward to your testimony. In preparation for the upcoming reauthorization of the Higher Education Act, the committee has held nearly a dozen hearings to explore the challenges and opportunities facing our nation's colleges and universities. We've discussed the value of transparency and data in helping prospective students choose the post-secondary institution that best meets their unique needs. We have examined factors that contribute to rising college costs and reviewed the consequences of burdensome federal regulations and paperwork requirements. And we've highlighted the critical importance of promoting innovation and academic freedom in our nation's higher education system. Without question, ensuring more students have access to an affordable, quality post-secondary education is a top priority for everyone in this room. But despite the best of intentions, the federal efforts to expand aid programs over the past 50 years have resulted in an overly complex system that is difficult to navigate. Today, with the help of our witnesses, we will explore opportunities to streamline the federal aid system, making it easier for students to evaluate federal aid options and make smart investments in post-secondary education. I'd like to take a moment to share with you the process students and families must go through when trying to access federal aid. First, students must complete the free application for federal student aid, or FAFSA, which includes more than 100 detailed questions on a range of topics including earnings and savings, parental education attainment, receipt of government benefits and assets. After completing the lengthy FAFSA application, students must try to understand the available aid options while also deciphering the differences between loans and grants. To make an informed decision about financial aid, students and their families need to grasp what makes each program unique, including the terms and conditions, eligibility requirements, and aid amounts awarded by individual institutions. And finally, when a student chooses an aid package, he or she must also begin thinking about how to eventually repay the loans. As we saw with the recent student loan interest rate debate, far too many students don't fully understand their loan obligations until after they graduate. And students often miss opportunities to take advantage of federal repayment initiatives simply because they don't know such programs exist. During the 2008 reauthorization of the Higher Education Act, Congress took an important first step toward improving the federal aid system by simplifying the FAFSA. But the still cumbersome application proves there's more work to be done. Fortunately, the higher education, business, and policy communities, in coordination with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation's Reimagining Aid Design and Delivery Initiative, have put forth a number of interesting ideas to restructure the system. One proposal suggests further streamlining the FAFSA by dramatically simplifying the need analysis formula used to determine student eligibility. Instead of calculating a student's expected family contribution through detailed questions, a modernized formula would only use the family size and adjusted gross income to determine eligibility. Additionally, the new formula would build on past efforts to rein in the FAFSA through partnerships with the IRS, allowing applicants to retrieve financial information more easily. To reduce confusion and complexity in the federal aid system, another proposal calls for the consolidation of all existing federal post-secondary aid programs into a one loan and one grant structure. In this scenario, students would have access to a single loan with a market-based interest rate and one universal repayment plan. Other proposals focus on helping students access more transparent information about their federal aid options, which has long been a Republican priority. Before I yield to the distinguished ranking member today, Mr. Hinojosa, I'd like to note that I am proud of the work we did earlier this year to revamp federal student loans. Though it was a difficult battle, eventually we came together on a bipartisan solution that has resulted in lower interest rates for millions of loan borrowers. We now have the opportunity to build on this success and find the common ground necessary to reauthorize the Higher Education Act. I look forward to working with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to strengthen the law and ensure more students can realize the dream of a college degree. And with that, I'd now like to recognize Mr. Hinojosa for his opening remarks.
Chairman Klein, thank you. Thank you for holding this hearing on student aid simplification, an important topic as we begin to reauthorize HEA. We know that now, more than ever, a higher education is a gateway to the American dream and a middle-class life. Unfortunately, we also know that rising costs are pushing a college degree out of reach for too many families. After many years of skyrocketing tuition, state budget cuts, and stagnant household incomes, students and their families are turning to loans to pay for college at unprecedented rates. Student loan debt has almost tripled in the last 8 years as more students need to borrow more money to go to college. The average student now graduates with $26,000 in debt. This year, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau found that total student debt in this country was more than $1.2 trillion, higher than the nation's total credit card debt. And it isn't just young people borrowing for school. Those 40-year-olds and older carry more than 34% of our nation's student loan debt. Falling behind on monthly payments will maim a borrower's credit rating and open the door to wage, Social Security, and tax refund garnishment. This debt threatens the upward mobility that higher education once guaranteed. We must make it as easy as possible for current and former students to dig out from underneath these burdens. For example, this committee can make student loan repayment easier. While federal loan borrowers enjoy a variety of payment plans, we have heard that borrowers can find the sheer number of options confusing. Repaying college loans should not be a troublesome, arduous process. This committee should examine if consolidating 7 different repayment options into fewer, more robust plans would benefit borrowers. Other options to explore are whether distressed borrowers could be automatically placed into an income-based repayment plan before the harsh penalties of default and collections occur. Recent initiatives to simplify the financial aid process and make college costs more transparent for students, such as financial aid shopping sheet or the college scorecard, and FAFSA simplification, have improved access to a higher education. But they alone cannot make the process of repaying student loans easier. As we look at ways to simplify the repayment process, we must also take care not to cut student aid programs nor eligibility. Such changes would only increase student loan debt. We must not lose sight of the fact that these borrowers are the nation's future. If they are shackled by unmanageable debt, our economy will invariably suffer. In closing, I want to say we have a moral and economic obligation to ensure that all qualified students who want to attend college can afford to go. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses on ways Congress can work together to address these questions and reduce student loan debt. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, thank you to the panelists, rather. Thank you for joining us today, and I look forward to hearing your presentations. With that, I yield back.
Thank you, gentlemen. Pursuant to Committee Rule 7C, all committee members will be permitted to submit written statements to be included in the permanent hearing record. And without objection, the hearing record will remain open for 14 days to allow statements, questions for the record, and other extraneous material referenced during the hearing to be submitted in the official hearing record. It is now my pleasure to introduce our distinguished panel of witnesses. Ms. Kristin Conklin is a founding partner of HCM Strategists, LLC, and a government relations and strategy development firm. Prior to starting HCM, Ms. Conklin served as senior advisor to the Undersecretary of the U.S. Department of Education. Dr. Sandy Baum currently serves as a research professor at the George Washington University Graduate School of Education and Human Development and a senior fellow at the Urban Institute. Ms. Jennifer Mashuri is the Deputy Director of Young Invincibles, a national nonprofit organization dedicated to expanding opportunities for young adults. And Mr. Jason Delisle serves as the Director of the Federal Education Budget Project at the New America Foundation. Previously, Mr. Delisle was a senior analyst on the Republican staff of the Senate Budget Committee and a legislative aide in the office of Mr. Thomas Petri. Before I recognize each of you to provide your testimony, let me briefly explain our high-tech lighting system. You will each have 5 minutes to present your testimony. When you begin, the light in front of you will turn green. When 1 minute is left, the light will turn yellow, and when your time has expired, the light will turn red. At that point, I ask you to wrap up your remarks as best you are able. After everyone has testified, members will each have 5 minutes to ask questions of the panel. I now recognize Ms. Conklin for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Klein, Ranking Member Hinojosa, and members of the committee for the opportunity to discuss how federal financial aid investments can work better for students, families, and taxpayers. My name is Kristin Conklin, and I stand before you as a Pell Grant recipient, the first in my family to graduate college. As a result of the education I received, I'm the first in my family to start a business and create jobs. I am here to share the work of HCM Strategists, a public policy and advocacy consulting firm. For millions of students, financial aid clears the path to the American dream. If I can leave you with one point, it is that simpler is better. Simpler is the best way to improve outcomes and more efficiently spend the billions of dollars in aid we already invest. Simpler requires a holistic look at all programs. This can be accomplished with a blank slate approach to reauthorizing the Higher Education Act next year. After decades of tinkering, we now have 4 different grant programs and 5 different loan programs, each with different eligibility criteria, different standards for maintaining the awards, different lengths of time a student can receive the awards, and different repayment terms. The average student completing the FAFSA faces 61 questions. No wonder nearly 2 million students eligible for aid never even apply. We can do better. This January, HCM released the American Dream 2.0 report. The report is a product of diverse leaders such as Indiana Governor Mitch Daniels, former director of the CBO Robert Reischauer, president of the National Urban League Mark Morial, and Tom Snyder of Ivy Tech Community College, as well as 2 of the co-panelists testifying with me today. The report received coverage in the New York Times and 280 other media outlets for its 3 overarching recommendations. 1, make aid simpler and more transparent. 2, spur innovations in higher education that can lower costs and meet the needs of today's students. And ask institutions, states, and students to share responsibility for producing more graduates. The technical panel of experts HCM led went a step further and offered specific recommendations needed to deliver on the coalition's recommendations. Our report, Doing Better for More Students, offers the most exhaustive modeling of options and impacts of any financial aid report. Our principal recommendations: students, families, and taxpayers would be much better served with 1 grant, 1 loan, and 1 tax benefit. Through pilot improvements tested in the last 4 years, we know it is possible to give students an instant lookup table powered by a smartphone app. Congress, however, will need to radically simplify needs analysis to make this vision a reality. We propose reducing needs analysis to 4 variables. First, if you receive federal means-tested assistance, you are automatically eligible for student aid. 2 other variables, adjusted gross family income and family size, would be retrieved by the IRS. A final variable would apply to students with more complex financial situations. Information regarding their assets can also be retrieved by the IRS. According to the Urban Institute Brookings Modeling HCM Commission, these changes can save between $37 and $73 billion. We also call for a single income-based loan repayment program with common annual and aggregate borrowing limits. For undergraduates, $87.50 a year and $35,000 total. For graduate students, $30,000 a year and $90,000 total. Savings from this simplification are projected to be $38 billion over 10 years. For both the single grant and loan programs, we recommend shared responsibility for college completion. To get a maximum annual grant or loan, students should complete 30 credit hours in a calendar year, enough to finish a bachelor's degree in 4 or an associate's degree in 2 years. For colleges, we recommend adding measures of equity and success to institutional Title IV eligibility. 10-year savings are projected to be $39 billion. Public opinion supports an emphasis on completion and simplification. Last year, HCM Strategists commissioned Hart Research Associates and the Winston Group to survey voters. They found 84% of voters agree that earning a credential is very important. 95% of African American parents and 97% of Hispanic parents agree. More than 3 in 5 voters think streamlining is a good approach. What can we expect from these changes? More needy students will believe that college is possible. Redefining full-time status will mean more students progress and graduate faster, requiring fewer total years of support. Financial aid counselors will spend less time on regulatory compliance and more time helping students succeed. Savings can be found that shore up the Pell Grant for another decade. Thank you for allowing me to talk on this important topic, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. Dr. Baum.
Thank you. Chairman Klein, Mr. Hinojosa, members of the committee, I'm very pleased to have an opportunity to speak with you today about simplifying the student aid system. I am a research professor at the George Washington University Graduate School of Education and a senior fellow at the Urban Institute, but the comments that I'm making today reflect my own opinions and are not the opinions of the organizations with which I'm affiliated. I could talk all day about student loans, but I'm going to focus on simplifying the federal grant system and in particular the Pell Grant program. I agree with everything that Kristin said, almost. But I really want to focus on the Pell Grant program because the Pell Grant program is the bedrock of the federal student aid system. For 40 years, it has transformed the lives of many students, and it can continue to do so. It can do better over the next 40 years if we simplify it, if we make it more transparent, if we make it more predictable for students, and if instead of just handing students money, we make sure that it involves the right incentives and the right supports for students and the institutions in which they enroll to achieve their goals. So what we need to do is we need to think carefully about how to reform the program using the principles of simplification and predictability and appropriate incentives. So we should simplify the application process so students don't have to provide information not available from the IRS. We should determine eligibility once before students begin their studies so that they don't have to reapply every year. We should simplify the formula with a simple lookup table that applies to most students. We should simplify the way enrollment is linked to the enrollment intensity. The amount of courses you take and credits for which you enroll is linked to the amount of money you get. We should think about the standards for academic progress more carefully, and we should consolidate federal aid programs. So as background, I know everyone's worried about how much the Pell Grant program spends. Pell Grant spending doubled very quickly over a few years, and the number of recipients also increased dramatically. But it's important to note that 2010-11 was a peak. It's not that we were on a trajectory. The economy, the recovery in the economy, and some of the changes that Congress made spending fall, made the number of recipients fall. We can argue about whether that's good or bad, but it's not that it's going to keep doubling. So let me talk a little bit about some specific proposals for reforming the Pell Grant program. And one important thing is that these are based on the ideas of how students and how human beings behave. We know a lot from behavioral economics about how people respond to information and opportunities, and in particular, we know that they respond to complexity by just withdrawing from making decisions and taking the path of least resistance. For young people growing up in middle and upper income families, the path of least resistance is going straight to college. But for people growing up in low income households, it's not. It's going to the workforce. So we need to simplify the system so that we make the path of least resistance going to college and knowing that you will be able to afford it. We can make the application process simple by saying we already know your information either through the IRS or through needs-based programs that you are available for. This would save the difficulty of verifying the information that people put on their FAFSA. We can simplify by saying you apply once. For juniors in high school, we could calculate their Pell eligibility and tell them about it. This would make not going to college and not taking a Pell Grant a loss, and people respond more strongly to losses than they do to being given certain amounts of money. One very important issue is how we allocate the amount of Pell Grant funds that students have to pay for their courses. Right now, if you are enrolled for 12 credit hours, you get the maximum Pell Grant if you have maximum need, and if you want to enroll for 15, we won't give you any more money, whether you do it over the summer or in the following semester. This means that students enroll for 12 credit hours, and they take 5 years to get a bachelor's degree or longer than 2 years to get an associate degree. We don't understand why students don't complete on time. This would help them to complete if we would give them additional funding when they enroll for the number of courses that they need in order to complete. Satisfactory academic progress is designed to make sure that students progress towards their goals, but right now, if you don't meet the standards at one school, you can go across the street to another school and get a new Pell Grant. That doesn't help students who borrow money, who spend their time going from school to school and not making progress. We need to make rules and regulations that will support students in meeting their goals. We also need to consolidate programs. Instead of having multiple federal grant programs, and that would exclude things like veterans programs and specifically targeted programs, we should have the Pell Grant program. The funds that are now in the campus-based programs should go to campuses, but they should be allocated to campuses to help them support the success of low-income students. We need to experiment with programs like this, get rigorous evidence about how to make them work well, but we can do this. To make the Pell Grant program work better, it has to be simpler, it has to be clearer, and it has to be designed to support students in meeting their goals. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Mashuri, you're recognized.
Thank you. Chairman Klein and Ranking Member Hinojosa, I thank you for having this important hearing today and for inviting me to share the student perspective on simplifying financial aid. My name is Jennifer Mashuri. I'm the Deputy Director of Young Invincibles. We're a nonprofit dedicated to expanding economic opportunity for young adults. We engage with students around college affordability and access, elevate their stories, and ensure that our leaders understand the experience of today's student. This generation understands that higher education is essential, but faces growing challenges. States are spending 28% less per student on higher education than they were in 2008, leading to a 27% increase in tuition at four-year public colleges. As a result, in 1980, the Pell Grant covered more than half the cost of a four-year school. It now covers less than a third, and it forces two-thirds of graduates to take out student loans. Many struggle to navigate the aid system in doing so. Take Robin, a college freshman at a four-year school studying to be a physical therapist. Robin grew up in a low-income community in Chicago, and as a first-generation student, she strove to obtain an education and gain financial security. Like most college students, she relied on a maze of grants and loans. However, at the end of her first semester, she found herself with an overcharged account and nowhere to turn. She reached out to a mentor, a former high school teacher who happened to be a friend of mine. I spent literally days working through all of the paperwork that she had and that I myself found very confusing, and finally realized she simply didn't have enough aid to cover her costs. The complex system meant it took months for the unmet need to become clear. Robin couldn't afford to pay the shortfall, private loans were not an option for her, and this college freshman with so much potential dropped out. I'm hopeful that she enrolled in a two-year school, but I don't know how her story will end. This story illustrates how an overly complex aid system can limit access and success. But it also illustrates that simplification cannot result in cutting aid to students working to educate themselves into the middle class. Students support making aid simpler, but oppose cutting aid. In a 2011 poll, 8 in 10 students opposed cutting Pell or loan subsidies to reduce the deficit. Important to keep in mind as we discuss these reforms. I want to talk about 3 reforms specifically. First, simplifying the aid application process on the front end. Second, ensuring that students can make good choices in dealing with financial aid. And third, streamlining repayment on the back end. First, applying for financial aid through the FAFSA, a 106-question form, leaves many confused and deters some from applying. About 2 million students who would have qualified for financial aid failed to even file a FAFSA in 2007. We urge this committee to reduce the number of questions on the FAFSA to make it simpler. And once students are making decisions on aid, students also need better information. Over 90% of students in one survey agreed that financial aid award letters should be standardized. Second, understanding aid can also be daunting, as we saw with Robin. In a recent survey, 40% of high-debt respondents to this survey reported they did not receive federally mandated loan counseling. It's possible that some students didn't receive the counseling, but it's also likely that many benefited so little that they didn't remember it, or didn't consider what they received to be counseling. I urge this committee to explore reforms that provide clear, consumer-tested materials to students and provide them with much more help from counselors. Third, loan repayment is also challenging, and the 7 different repayment plans mean that borrowers frequently struggle to choose a plan that's right for them or to even know about their options. As a result, many debtors struggle to afford the standard payments, and we face a sky-high 15% default rate. Income-based repayment has helped some borrowers, but we can do more. We're pleased that the Department of Education will begin proactively reaching out to students about IBR and believe that this committee could build on that. We recommend either automatically enrolling all students in income-based repayments or allowing them to opt out of an income-based repayment plan rather than having to opt in. A survey conducted by YI found that 89% of respondents agreed with automatically being enrolled in IBR. We could also alter the formula, helping students pay faster if they can, and we could potentially streamline repayment through the payroll tax system. While most students would still pay off their loans in a similar amount of time, it would cushion debtors facing financial distress, ultimately lowering default rates. It would make repayment less confusing and reduce the risk perceived by students who hesitate to pursue a degree in the first place. Finally, in the system, schools must be held accountable to keep tuition low. We're encouraged that some members of this committee have expressed an interest in repayment reform. We have concerns, however, about proposals that strip necessary protections. Caps on interest rates and forgiveness for public service employees or debtors who have been paying for decades are vital elements in the current system. We can simplify financial aid and preserve those elements. Thank you for exploring these important issues, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you. Mr. Delisle.
Chairman Klein, Ranking Member Hinojosa, and committee members, thank you for inviting me to testify about the need to simplify the federal student loan program. From the borrower's perspective, the loan program is unnecessarily complex, and many of its important benefits are difficult to access, are hidden, or require the borrower to opt in. Some terms and benefits even overlap or cancel one another out. When a student applies for his federal loans, he will confront a mix of types, terms, and names. Some may make sense, others will confuse him, and some he may not even know exist. Will he know that a Stafford loan is a loan from the federal government? Will he understand that unsubsidized doesn't mean he's getting a bad deal? When he repays his loans, he will have up to 9 different plans to choose from. That's my count. Others said 7. Each with its own set of terms and eligibility rules. But here's the kicker. The Department of Education, by law, will automatically enroll him in the plan where he will make the highest monthly payments, the 10-year standard repayment plan. To be sure, this policy signals to borrowers that they should repay their loans quickly. Yet, policymakers need to recognize its inherent trade-off. Borrowers who really need to make lower payments may not understand that they have such an option or may not be able to successfully navigate the enrollment process. That seems like a high price to pay in order to nudge borrowers to repay quickly under the 10-year repayment plan. So as Congress considers the reauthorization of the Higher Education Act in the coming months, lawmakers should make it a priority to remedy these issues. Briefly, they should minimize the different names, types, and terms of the loans, and then offer just one plan when borrowers repay, the existing income-based repayment plan, or what the Obama administration calls pay-as-you-earn, but only after making essential modifications to that plan. In its current form, pay-as-you-earn is a massive tuition assistance program for graduate students masquerading as a means-tested safety net program. So let me provide you with a few examples of the complexities and optional benefits in the federal loan program that I mentioned earlier. The program offers 2 different types of loans to undergraduates, unsubsidized and subsidized Staffords. Many borrowers qualify for both, and they've received both. An undergraduate could also have a 3rd type of federal loan called a Perkins loan. And if he goes on to graduate school, he could end up with a 4th type of federal loan called a Grad Plus loan. Earlier, I mentioned that a borrower, once out of school, can choose from up to 9 repayment plans. He might not be eligible for all of them, although that is actually possible, but he probably qualifies for at least 4 of them. Many of these plans have hidden benefits or confusing names that make them difficult to distinguish. I wonder if even the committee members can keep the differences straight between graduated repayment, income contingent repayment, income-based repayment, and pay-as-you-earn. And I would bet that everyone is surprised to learn that the biggest benefit of the consolidation repayment plan has nothing to do with consolidating debt. Nope, that plan lets anyone with a balance of just $7,500 or more reduce his monthly payment by extending the term of his loan to anywhere from 12 to 30 years, depending on the balance. And now that I've said that, I'm sure someone somewhere is wondering why then the program also offers an extended repayment plan, which, by the way, is not the same as the consolidation plan, but it will extend the term of the loan and by a completely different set of rules. The written testimony that I submitted today includes some specifics on how to minimize the different terms on federal loans. It also includes changes lawmakers should make to pay-as-you-earn, so that the plan does not let high-income borrowers walk away from their debts, does not allow graduate students to finance most or all of their educations using loan forgiveness, and does not indemnify or reward schools when they charge more and students when they borrow more. Before making pay-as-you-earn the only repayment option, which is what I'm recommending today, Congress must ensure that its loan forgiveness benefit is truly and only a safety net, and that public service loan forgiveness benefit is subject to limits. Making pay-as-you-earn the only repayment plan available would greatly simplify the program. It would also automatically provide benefits that exist right now in the current program, and it would provide them to those who need them most. Borrowers who still want to pay their loans off on a 10-year plan could do so by making repayments in amounts automatically calculated on their statements. Now, I should note that under the modified version of pay-as-you-earn that I am recommending, some borrowers would make higher monthly payments. That is, they would repay faster than under today's system, particularly high earners and those with smaller loan balances. Yet that is a trade-off worth making in order to achieve a student loan program where benefits for those who need the most are automatic and obvious rather than obscure and optional. That concludes my testimony today. I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you very much. Thanks to all of you. I didn't hear any of you say that you thought we ought to have a more complicated system. Just when I'm convinced it will be impossible for us to make a more complicated system, I look around and we've done so. So I'm delighted that there seems to be a consensus among you, and I'm guessing among our colleagues here on both sides of the aisle, but we'll see as we go forward, that what we have now is too complicated, and so it doesn't get used in some cases, it gets abused in other cases. Mr. Delisle sort of challenged the members of the committee to explain the 4, 5, 9 hike different ones, and nobody here is going to take that challenge. I don't think, maybe Mr. Hinojosa, but. So I think that there is a growing consensus that we have got a complicated system that must be changed. So let me start with you, Ms. Conklin. You must have heard from some people that oppose creating a single source of loan and grant funds. Who are those people, and what do you say to them?
I hear most people object to the idea of picking and choosing from options. So what we recommend through this HCM technical panel is a holistic look at a single grant and a single loan program, because it can promote college affordability so much better than the alternatives. It can make it much easier for students to apply. We expect many more students will be eligible. We can pay for that with savings in the loan program in the ways that Jason has identified, where we transfer the subsidy to the back end of the loans. It finds savings that will allow us to shore up the Pell Grant program beyond 2014 when deficits are projected again. According to the Southern Education Foundation, half of our students in school today are on free and reduced lunch. It's highly likely that they'll be needing a Pell Grant, and we need to find savings to make sure and support them. 3, it helps more students graduate and graduate on time. The biggest college affordability issue we face is students who fail to graduate but have debt, so this debt with no degree, or who take 5, 6, 7, 8 years, and every year they're paying more tuition and losing income. That's an affordability crisis. And last, again, the significant loan aversion we see for low-income students who don't understand this process. Again, if you look at this holistically, instead of picking and choosing different provisions, you can create a program that's much simpler. We think that many more of the Pell Grant students who turn down loans today will be inclined to borrow and therefore go full-time and complete on time. Thank you.
I think I understand the arguments for this, but I guess let me try the question again. When you HCM, you put your report out there and you explain this program, you never run up against somebody who says, no, we shouldn't do that?
We were surprised by how remarkable the consensus was for the general recommendations we propose.
Okay, fair enough. And as I said in my remarks just a minute ago, there does seem to be a growing consensus. What we have now is just awful. Dr. Baum, you limited your remarks to the Pell Grant program, and it is huge, and I think somebody noted that it's essentially doubled over the last few years, but is leveling, and it looks like we're actually going to see a dip and make money, if you will. That's a poor choice of words, but that probably won't continue. So if we go to simplification as one of our goals here, not just for loans but for others, will that help to stabilize the Pell Grant, to keep this kind of thing from going on, and how would that work?
Well, I think that simplification can help all aspects of the program. Let me just say, in response to the question that you asked about why there's opposition to simplification, nobody's opposed in principle to simplification, but the fact is any changes that you make are going to change the benefits that some people get. And it's very difficult for people who are used to a system being the way it is not to focus on the loss that individual students might experience. And I think that Congress has to be very careful in modifying the program to look at who's going to benefit and who's going to be hurt. But we will be immobilized if we think that if we find an individual student who ends up worse off, we can't move forward. One important issue, and one of the issues that I focused on a lot, is that Pell Grant recipients and student aid recipients altogether include not just our vision of young people from low-income households, but also adults. I mean, this is really a workforce education program that pays to get people the skills that they need to be productive workers. And I think people focus either on one group or another. Both groups are very important. But it's the kind of thing where people are focused on what will happen to one group if we make a small change. And I think that a careful analysis and careful approach to reform will help that. In terms of simplification and the budget, if we can predict, if students can predict ahead of time what they're going to get, we'll be more able to predict who's going to benefit. If students have incentives to progress in a timely manner. We should be able to give students more money to cover their studies while giving them money for a shorter period of time, and that can save money. If we're careful about defining who's eligible for benefits, for example, in the ways that Jason discussed, making sure that the loan program works correctly, we can target the program effectively, and we can control its costs without depriving the students who really need the funding from those benefits.
Thank you. My time has expired. Mr. Hinojosa.
Thank you. I have lots of questions, and I want to start with Jennifer Mishery. Ms. Mishery, some proposals to link loan repayment to a borrower's wages would eliminate student loan forgiveness options, something that I consider to be very important, especially those of us who represent regions with a high percentage below the national poverty level. Are loan forgiveness options important if a borrower is repaying based on a percentage of their income?
We think that loan forgiveness options are very important in any reform. They both give students and borrowers a light at the end of the tunnel. So if someone has been paying for 20, 25 years, they're at a point when they should be starting to think about retirement, should have started to think about retirement before then. And we want borrowers to be able to move on with their life. The system perhaps didn't work for them. You know, they paid for 20 years and they didn't get the returns that they expected when they entered school. So we think that kind of forgiveness is very important. And we think that public service loan forgiveness is very important. You know, it provides students from low and moderate income families with an ability to serve their communities, to serve their country. It provides us with students who may be interested in entering the workforce and filling jobs where we actually need more public service workers, and really giving them the ability to do that. And it allows those talented and dedicated young people who may, again, be from low and moderate income families to really find a good skills match for their skills in the public service.
Thank you. Ms. Conklin, in your testimony, you recommend moving to a single income-based loan repayment system. When other countries have moved to similar systems, they are frequently paired with strong front-end protections for the students to control the college costs. Could an automatic income-based repayment system reduce pressures on colleges to control costs? And likewise, could it reduce the pressures on students to borrow less?
Thank you, Mr. Hinojosa. So one of the recommendations that's implicit in one loan program is to eliminate both PLUS and the Grad PLUS loan programs, which don't have time limits, and we think create an incentive for institutions to not restructure their costs in the way they need to do to get tuition to a more moderate rate. So again, what we do in creating one default income-based repayment program is we actually raise the loan limits within that program. We set it one for undergraduates, one for graduates, and we hope that that while that's lower than what's currently available if you're availing yourself of a PLUS loan program, that will be sufficient to pay for school for most students and will create some downward pressure on the higher priced institutions to restructure their costs. We also look at the role of states. The American Dream 2.0 Coalition was very clear that the role of states is to create more low-cost pathways. And so it's very important for states to do that. I don't think that's a federal role. I think that's the states stepping up on their historic role, sir.
Thank you. Dr. Baum, you propose determining Pell eligibility just once when students are juniors in high school and allowing that eligibility to last through age 24. Could you elaborate on how this simplification would encourage more low-income students to apply to college while reducing the burden on institutions of higher education?
So the idea of having people apply just once is important because it means that people don't go through this bureaucracy over and over. It means that they know ahead of time how much money they will get. And again, as I said in my testimony, it's sort of you're saying to people, you have this money, and it's theirs not to spend, and that can make a significant difference. The amount of bureaucracy that goes on now at institutions to verify what people say on their FAFSAs. I mean, you can write anything you want to on your FAFSA, right? And so what we have to do is compare it to the tax forms, and it's all very complicated, and that's a waste of everyone's resources, and we could eliminate that.
I understand. I am running out of time, but there are two questions that are very important to me. One is that in the years of 2002 through 2010, under the Bush administration, there were Pell Grants of 3,000 to 3,400, and 2 years I remember they wanted to either eliminate it or cut it in more than half because we needed that money for war. Yet, when they lost the majority, I remember having presidents and chancellors come to my office, because by then I was chairman of the committee, and they said that one of their highest priorities was to raise the Pell Grant because middle-income families were hurting badly. And all of this to say that we were trying to get out of recession. So I want members of our committee to be able to see that, that chart in your remarks and understand why that happened. And lastly, that we increased minorities, Hispanics and African Americans, going to community colleges and to universities because it became more affordable and accessible. Thank you.
Gentleman's time has expired. Mr. Petri.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I noticed in your prepared testimony that everyone, except I think Dr. Baum, who was more talking about grant programs, endorsed making some form of income-based repayment the automatic or sole repayment option for federal student loans. And I'd really like to ask each of you, and Dr. Baum, if you'd care to comment on it as well, if you could elaborate on your thinking regarding the potential benefits of making income-based automatic in terms of simplification and other goals that we're pursuing in the reauthorization. Now, who would like to start?
I'll start since I didn't say anything about it. I totally support that proposal. It's too complicated for students. Not enough people are participating in the program, and making it the default option would make more students be able to benefit from it. But we do need to make the kinds of revisions that Mr. Delisle has proposed in order to make this an efficient program. And many of those provisions are in the bill that you have proposed about income-based repayment.
Sure. I mean, I think that for students who are trying to figure out their options when they leave school, having a simple, streamlined process can be huge and can be very helpful. I mean, students, we were actually down in Miami last week doing roundtables with students and talking about the kinds of information that they need and what they know about different programs. And none of the students we talked to had actually heard of income-based repayment. And so, that's a problem, right? But this is a program that can be very helpful to a lot of students, and we need to make sure that we're providing this policy in a way that students know that it's there for them so they can understand what types of risk they may be taking on and really encourage them to go to school and take out loans when they need to. And then on the back end, when they might be struggling to repay those loans, we do face a high default rate for student loans, and we want to make sure that we can cut into that by doing things like streamlining this process.
So I hear a lot of people say, when we talk about our student loan system in the United States, they point to other countries like the UK or Australia that have income-based repayment programs, and then they say, why don't we have something like that? We do. We do have something exactly like that. It's just not automatic. So I think when people ask that question, what they're saying is, why don't we just make it automatic then, if we already have it? And so what we've done is I mentioned in my spoken testimony about the Department of Education automatically enrolling people in the 10-year standard repayment, which is basically your highest monthly payment. And then we sort of let them maybe find their way to the more generous, more beneficial options in the loan program. But if they're there, why not just start people in those programs to begin with, and why not just make that the only program, especially since it provides people who need the most help with it automatically. Now, there are people using the income-based repayment program. People who figured this out, that this is available, are graduate students. The average outstanding loan balance in income-based repayment right now is about $57,000. Now, we heard at the beginning the average amount of debt that an undergraduate leaves with is around $25,000, and in fact, the federal government caps how much an undergraduate can borrow well below $57,000. So what we've got is we've got a program here where the graduate students have figured it out, and the people who really need the help, the undergrads, aren't necessarily using the program.
Mr. Petrie, I want to echo what my group has said, and again what I said to the chairman, that there's a remarkable amount of consensus in the reform community for the proposals that, frankly, you were an early leader on, and so I commend you for that. I'm actually going to respond that one of the reasons for the income-based repayment and the simplification and the default option we talk about is to put student success at the center of what we do. We see there's some really good data out of Wisconsin looking at individual students, and at least 20% of Pell Grant students fail to even take a single loan, and up to half of students do not take the amount they're eligible for. What does that mean? They're much less likely to go full-time. They're much less likely in that first year to make the progress they need to make that we know is associated with success. Some of them are much less likely to go to the more selective institutions we know they are likely to attend. That's that undermatching phenomenon you may have been reading about lately. So really understanding early whether you're a traditional or non-traditional student that this is a single loan repayment option and what your repayment terms will look like is, I think, a way to put student success at the center of our loan programs.
Thank you all. I just have 20 seconds left. So I just want to make one comment. It was touched on, I think, especially in Ms. Mashori's testimony, and that is where and how if we simplify the program, we focused the subsidies that they're inevitably going to be subsidies of people who just can't repay their loans, and how we should be, if we should be providing subsidies also to higher income people and others because they're doing something that sounds good. But anyway, that's a discussion for another day. But if we have a pot of subsidies, we should have a rational discussion as to on what basis they should be given, rather than just have an automatic preference for some people who, when you analyze the situation, may not deserve it.
Gentleman's time has expired. Mr. Bishop.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. You know, you said before who are the people that are opposed to one grant, one loan, and I hate to see you disappointed, Mr. Chairman, so I thought that I would...
Will the gentleman yield?
Of course.
I knew I could count on you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. But before I talk about my skepticism regarding one grant, one loan, one work, I sincerely do want to thank you for this hearing and to thank the panel. This has been great. Lots of great ideas. I think, in all seriousness, Mr. Chairman, we should be doing a couple of these because there's lots of issues here. We're not going to be able to cover them all in one hearing. So thank you all very, very much. Now let me, and Dr. Baum, I'm going to kind of focus on you because you're proposing the elimination of the campus-based programs, which I will say respectfully I think is a bad idea. And let me tell you why. I used to administer campus-based programs. I was a financial aid director for 7 years, way back. And what I found was the most helpful about the campus-based programs is that they were a way of what I always call putting out fires. They were a way of dealing with students whose circumstances had changed, or that the traditional programs, the external programs, the entitlement programs didn't give them what they needed. And so to give the financial aid officer the discretion that he or she could then apply to save enrollments. I mean, we have two problems here. We have an access problem, and I think you could make an argument that one grant, one loan, one work would assist with an access problem, but we also have a completion problem. And I think if you were to eliminate campus-based, there would be a serious concern with respect to completion. And because if you look at it, the traditional private not-for-profits, they discount aid, they have institutional aid, so they could address that issue. But the state schools don't really discount aid. And so unless they have endowment income or philanthropy, they're not going to have their own resources to provide. And the for-profits do very little in the way of discounting aid or in what we would call traditional institutional grant aid. So I'm concerned that in the overall heading of simplifying, that what we're really going to do is deny a resource to the campus aid officer that is used millions of times a year to save enrollments. I'd like to hear your comment.
Well, I would note that I'm not proposing taking this money away from campuses. I'm proposing distributing it to campuses differently. Right now, some campuses get a lot of the campus-based money just for historical reasons, and many of the campuses that enroll many needy students don't get much of it. So if we allocate the funds to institutions based on their success with low-income students, they will have the opportunity to use the money to put either directly into students' pockets or to support students
if I
in
may.
other ways.
But if we go to one grant, one loan, one work, which is what I'm hearing, one grant presumably is Pell, right? And unless we're going to restructure the way we award Pell, then that's going to be money that, I mean, and yes, we're going to add to the funding for it, but that's money that's going to be available to the student up front.
No, so my proposal would put money in the institutions that they could use to give institutional grants to students. It wouldn't interfere with the one.
Not trying to be argumentative there. So you are not then advocating one grant, one loan, one work.
In my view, I am advocating one grant to students from the federal government.
Now I'm thoroughly lost. But with this as a discussion, perhaps we can continue. I want to go to a point that Ms. Mishri made, which I think is really, really important, and none of us should lose sight of this. What you said, what I heard you say, was that the aid process ought to be simpler. I think we all agree with that, but we ought not to reduce supporting, that we ought not to reduce the total amount of student financial aid that's available. And I think what's important for us to all recognize is that's precisely what we're doing. We are reducing the total amount of aid that's available to students. Current law, Pell Grant will go down by $310 next year and $400 the year after, unless we change current law. Sequestration is current law. That has resulted in a $37 million reduction SEOG in the current year and a $40-some million reduction in SEOG next year. College work study. There's been a $49 million reduction in college work study this year, and next year another $79 million unless we change current law. That's what we're dealing with. And current law, the Perkins Loan Program goes away in 2015. That's $1.2 billion a year taken out of the student loan program. So we can simplify all we want, and I would urge us to do so, but let us not do so at the cost of the assistance that students very badly need, yet that's precisely what we're doing. And we ought not to let a focus on simplification be, in effect, a fig leaf for what we're really doing to students, which is taking away resources. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back.
I thank the gentleman. Ms. Fox.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At a recent meeting, I had an agreement with Ranking Member Miller, and I have to say that I have a little bit of an agreement with Mr. Bishop in terms of keeping campuses involved in ways that they're dealing with students. Having worked on a campus myself and worked with, I wasn't a financial aid director, but I worked with Upward Bound Special Services and orientation and academic advising.
Well, the generally yield, it's only a very select group that are chosen to be financial aid directors.
But I think he makes a really good point about the need to keep campuses involved with what's happening with the students in terms of aid. But, Ms. Conklin, I'd like to ask you a question. The committee's been grappling with the question of what information the federal government should make public to help students and families make informed decisions about their post-secondary education options, and there are certainly plenty. If we were to drill down to 5 or 6 data points that are absolutely necessary for students to have to make good decisions, what do you think those points would be, and maybe a little bit about how they could be presented to the students? Some people have expanded a lot on what should be made available, but just brief comments about that.
Thank you for your focus on transparency. Again, the HEART research that we did with the Winston Group showed that this was the most important issue to voters, was to increase transparency and improve their decisions. HCM led a project called the Voluntary Institutional Metrics Project, and we had a group of diverse group of institutions, not-for-profit, for-profit, and public, come together and agree on 5 metrics. Those are useful metrics to answer your question. The first are progression and completion metrics, the kind that a number of states have voluntarily agreed to report already. Loan repayment, input adjusted, of course, if possible. Cost per degree, or net price, two sides of the same, two important metrics. Recent wages, wages of recent graduates, and a learning metric. And so I would start with that. I think from an investor perspective at the federal level, you also need to know what regularly how many the percentage of Pell students an institution enrolls, and how well they do. What's their completion statistics?
Thank you very much. Mr. Delisle, your testimony raises some interesting suggestions, but you didn't really touch upon ideas about how to encourage completion. And I realize in this whole debate we've been having in the last couple of years how the emphasis has changed from access to all of a sudden everybody's interested in completion. Is there a way for the federal government to encourage college completion with the needs of non-traditional students, many of whom have to balance family or jobs with their academics? And I'm going to give a prize to anybody who can come up with a way to stop using the word non-traditional students, because what we talk about as traditional students make up like 27% of the student body now, and something's wrong with this picture. So anybody on the panel, if you can come up with a good word, I'm looking for one. Mr. DeLee.
So I wanted to keep my testimony today. You're correct. I didn't mention anything about incentivizing completion explicitly. I wanted to keep the testimony very much so focused on the message of simplification and highlighting the complexities that exist in the program now. Also, when you start talking about adding in provisions that might incentivize completion, you tend to start to make the program more complicated rather than simplify it. So there is a very difficult tension there between those two goals that it seems like my testimony skirts them a little bit. But I would point out that there are parts of my recommendations that would implicitly incentivize completion. For example, the messages around loan limits. So for example, parents, for example, can borrow whatever the school charges in federal loans through the Parent Plus loan program, whatever the school charges, and for as long as the student wants to attend. There is no aggregate, there is no annual, there is no lifetime limit on the amount of money the federal government will lend a parent whose student is attending an undergraduate school. Well, putting some limits on that, or eliminating that program and putting higher loan limits in the undergrad limits, sends a message that there is a limit to the amount of time you can use federal aid to attend college. So there are places, there are other examples where students can borrow for their full cost of living, even if they're only attending part-time. Well, that seems not to make sense, and that's another place.
I hate to interrupt, but the gentlelady's time has expired. Ms. Bonamici, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for holding this important hearing. Thanks to you and Mr. Hinojosa. Thank you to the witnesses for being here. I actually worked my way through community college, and law school using a combination of grants, loans, and work study. And although that was more than a few years ago, I think you've certainly made the case that simplification is needed. But I have to say that simplifying the financial aid process is an important step, but only one step in helping more students access college. And how we simplify, of course, is what we'll be discussing, and whether that simplification results in more or fewer students attending college is going to be important. But as a committee, we should always be looking for new and creative ways to help lower the costs of college, and that includes allowing colleges to work together to increase institutional need-based aid, and also doing what we can to promote the reversal of the trend of state disinvestment in higher education. I want to start by asking Ms. Mashori, I agree with you that too many students are taking on too much debt, and they need to be included in this conversation, so thank you for your work. Is there any part of the financial aid system right now that does a good job of listening to students' needs, and if so, will you briefly discuss that?
Sure. I mean, I think that the Pell Grant program itself is a very important program. It helps millions of students access higher education who wouldn't otherwise have been able to do so, and it's been the bedrock of the program. So the Pell Grant program is incredibly important for students. And I would urge the committee to continue and to really prioritize that as we're looking at reauthorization. I think that there are programs that I think have a lot to offer, but we could also think about how we can actually improve them. And the Federal Work-Study Program is actually something we've been looking at a lot. There's a lot of potential there. There's potential to be working and actually getting experience while you're studying and really combining those two processes. I think right now, and Dr. Baum mentioned this earlier, the Federal Work-Study Program isn't always targeted in a way that we would like to see it targeted. Some institutions might get it because they've been around for a long time. Some higher earning families might get it when we really want to see it targeted at lower and moderate income families. So I think there are things that are absolutely working for students. There are things that we can improve, and there are certainly things we can simplify.
Great, thank you. And I actually have a bill, Opportunities for Success, that will help Pell Grant eligible students get internships that will help them get job experience. So we can talk about that at another time. So many of you are likely aware that my home state of Oregon recently passed legislation to study an innovative proposal, Pay It Forward, Pay It Back, and we have actually representatives from our Portland State University with us today. So under this system, which Oregon is studying, has not implemented, just to make that clear, students would pay no upfront cost for tuition, but then after graduation would pay back a certain percentage of their income for a certain length of time. All of these elements are going to be considered in the study. And frankly, I applaud our state legislature for passing that legislation to embark on that study, because we really need some big picture creative thinking about better ways to make college more affordable and more workable for students. So I want to hear your thoughts on how both Congress could think more creatively about affordability and retention, and how can we encourage institutions of higher education to do the same. And I want to start maybe with Ms. Conklin. I know that your report, your second recommendation is for spurring innovation. So can you talk about some, let's think outside the box. What are some other ideas to help with college affordability?
So there are three. Thank you very much. I appreciate that question, and agree with you that that idea in Oregon is big and creative, and I understand that the study is being carefully watched nationwide. Couple ideas. One I'd talk about just today and refer you to the report for a couple of others. But the first one is to recognize that a significant way we lose students and they don't succeed, and a significant way that college becomes more expensive for them, is when they spend a lot of time in remediation. And so one of the innovative ideas we proposed is to create a new Pell Ready grant worth $1,800, test it in 5 or 6 states, rigorously evaluate it, portion out the money on the basis of how students attain those college-ready skills, allow them to be regularly tested, create some competition for providers, have the states select those providers, really kind of set aside 80% for low-income students in high schools, 20% for adults who need basic skills. We saw the OECD report yesterday. There's a great 23 million Americans who need basic skills. So try this way to get students the remediation they need at a much lower cost than when at the full price in a traditional public or post-secondary institution.
Terrific. And my time's about to expire. I want Ms. Mishori to respond as well. Thank you.
Sure, and we've looked at the Pay It Forward proposal, and I think that it's a bold, innovative idea. I think there are both positives and negatives to the idea. I think that we're also carefully watching that. But I think we've looked at some ideas around campus aid and how we can better send some of that aid to schools that are doing a better job with students. And so that's something that we're particularly interested in.
Thank you.
Gentlelady's time has expired. Mr. Messer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the opportunity to be here and this important hearing. I certainly understand the importance of the federal student loan program. I'm very much a product of the federal student loan and student financial aid program. Stafford loans, Perkins, Pell Grants, all those things were part of my life. And I want to maybe give Mr. Delisle, is that right, an opportunity to finish his answer from just a few minutes ago and just say this. I think one of the things that has changed in the way we approach federal student aid, or at least needs to change, is we had a system that was always based on access, and that made sense because by and large the numbers were that if you had some college, you were going to be better off economically in your life than no college at all. Clearly that's changed now, and unless you have a degree of completion in a degree that adds value to the marketplace, you're not going to do any better academically. I mean, you're not going to do any better economically than you would otherwise have done. And sadly for many students, if you leave with tens of thousands of dollars in debt and have no degree, then you're by definition much worse off because you don't have a better economic opportunity and you have a lot of debt. And so I think reforms that drive us towards completion are at least something we got to give strong consideration. So invite Mr. Delau to finish maybe your answer from a minute ago, and any others on the panel that would like to talk about what we could do to motivate completion.
Sure. What I was talking about was that there are places where I think that we've probably gone overboard or haven't thought very carefully about the signals that we send to people in the amount of aid that is available and when it's available and under what circumstances that are perhaps too open-ended. So, for example, on the students who attend part-time but then can borrow the full loan amount as if they were attending full-time. So essentially what they're doing is they're using up a huge chunk of their loan eligibility for just cost of living or whatever it might be, rather than paying tuition, and we cut that off. And then on the graduate side, we just let it go and go and go and go.
Sure.
I would like to add that I think that discussions about how to structure student aid programs to incentivize completion are important, but we shouldn't just take as given where students are. Students have to select programs and institutions that are appropriate for them. And right now, students don't have the information or the assistance in doing that, particularly older students who don't have high school guidance counselors, who don't have people around them to really help them. We need to make sure that students have assistance in making the decisions about what to study, where to study, and when to study, and then they will be more likely to complete.
I would just like to echo the comment on counseling. I think that it can't be underscored enough. I think right now our high school counseling rate is perhaps one counselor to every 476 students in a public high school. And so a student really trying to make good decisions for themselves is not getting the kind of help that they need.
Mr. Messer, I think it's important to recognize that failing to complete a college credential is not a demographic destiny, that it's due in some part to what public policy pays for. A recent survey of Complete College America, based in your home state, found that fewer than a third of full-time community college students are actually taking enough courses to graduate on time. They're taking the Pell Grant, and they're taking RQ, that 12 credit hours is sufficient. So in a sense, we're not telling them that the expectations are much higher than you realize. And in fact, because of the way we price college, where we are doing it a la carte by credit, you actually are penalized, and you get a bigger rebate if you take the fewer credits than if you took the 15. So we really ask you to examine what are the incentives based on what we define as full-time.
And not knowing how much time exactly I have left, I'll make one other quick comment. If we have time, I hope to get your response. Hopefully we can explore it in a different hearing. I think a second area is that many of these programs tend to only incent four-year degrees in the right kind, in sort of the traditional college where you show up and go to 4 homecomings, you're carrying a backpack. And at least in my district, which is 19 mostly rural counties with agriculture and manufacturing-based economies, folks that could take a technical degree or maybe even a trucking course that gave them a 3-month trucking course but gave them a job right away and the ability to pay back many of these programs right away. What could we do to look at broadening the array of programs that these financial aid is eligible for?
Well, students are actually able to use their financial aid for those programs now. It's just that they don't know how to pick the right programs. Some of them are great and some of them are not.
Is that right? I'll tell you, our community colleges and others have said that, have talked to me directly about the restrictions on those kinds of programs. So you're saying you don't believe those restrictions are there?
As long as they are credit-bearing, there are non-credit courses for which aid is not available, and that is an issue at community colleges.
Okay.
The gentleman's time has expired. Mr. Procan. New members to the committee are limited to 30 seconds, so.
I went over it.
You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. I tried to do that at the beginning, be very brief to make up for now. I do just want to say, if I can, before I start with the questions, I really am glad to be on this committee. Not only, as mentioned, my background, I've been a small business owner for 25 years. It's also of a union shop. So when it comes to labor employment issues, hopefully I can bring some of that background to the committee. But also, I have about 75,000 students in my district. Not only do we have the flagship University of Wisconsin, the flagship of our system, world-class university, but we also have private colleges like Beloit College, which were started before our statehood, 1846. We have Edgewood College, Madison College, a technical college, many small private colleges. So especially glad to be on this committee, and I thank you very much for that opportunity. I think one of the questions or areas I'd like to get to, when I went around this past period, and I was at Beloit College, and I was at UW-Madison, I was at a number of high schools. I'm going to Edgewood College this Saturday, so I do spend a lot of time talking to students and folks going to universities. You know, we talk about the three parts. One is the affordability of school, and I think there's still a lot more conversation around that, although, Ms. Mashuri, I really appreciate the comment you said about public universities. When we got the economic hit in the states, 49 states got hit. I was the chair of a finance committee at the time. We did decline our support, and we've continued to decline our support to our state university like we've seen in many other states, and that's had a really big impact. We talk about the availability of financial aid, making sure we've got loans available, and as Mr. Bishop said, things like Pell Grants and things that are being hit because of the sequester. I'm a Pell Grant recipient, loan recipient. That's how I got through college. It's really important. But one of the things that came up, the third area I talk about is how you make sure that you're able to pay for those loans afterwards. When I went to school, it wasn't as many years you had to pay it off between 82 and 86 when I went to school. You know, it's a little bit easier. Now they've become longer-term loans, much more debt. And we've got a group in Wisconsin that's helped us look at the thinking around this a little bit. I talked to a student when I was home this last period who has some loans at the 6.8%, literally left college to go join the military so they could come back and get a free education after that point, but they still have the 6.8%. And I think one of the issues that came up from a group in Wisconsin, and we've done a bill on, and it hasn't really been addressed, but I'd love to hear your perspectives, is the potential to be able to make it easier to refinance loans. You know, one of the things is if people are paying either higher interest rates or longer-term loans, they're having a used car instead of a new car, not helping the economy. They're renting rather than buying, again, not necessarily stimulating the economy. And Ms. Mashuri, you specifically talked about that 15% not paying, but I'd love to hear any of your perspective on the idea of maybe making it easier to refinance at current rates and what that might be able to do to help overall.
Well, first of all, you can refinance the loans, just like you can a mortgage. There is no prepayment penalty on a federal student loan. So you can take out a loan from somebody else at a lower interest rate and pay off your entire federal student loan without a penalty. So in that regard, there is no barrier to refinancing the loan. Now, the issue is you have to find someone who wants to make you an unsecured loan at a fixed interest rate around 4 or 5% for the next 10, 20 years. Nobody wants to do that with their own money. So in that regard, there is no opportunity to refinance the loan. So what you would have to do essentially is provide borrowers another chance to get a different interest rate on their current student loan. But what you are doing then is you were saying the borrower is receiving a subsidy and let's just increase it. But then the question becomes, well, how much and why and for whom and how do you determine that? And then I would argue that if you can pay back your loan based on your income, which everybody can in the federal student loan program, then the payments are by definition affordable, and the interest rate does not dictate whether or not you can make your payments.
I would add to that. I would say that there certainly are students that are facing high interest rates on their federal loans, which is concerning. I just wanted to add and make the point, there's also a lot of students that are facing incredibly high interest rates on their private loans, and so that's something to think about as well. And those interest rates actually, they're not capped, so they can be sky high, they can be double digits. So something, as you're thinking about refinancing interest rates, to think about as well.
Okay.
If we had interest rates moving with the market on loans, then we wouldn't run into this problem. And it's upsetting that students are now locked into loans with high interest rates. When interest rates are high in the economy, then we might be concerned about some people, depending on when they went to school, having a subsidy because they have a low interest rate locked in, whereas people who go to school when interest rates are high end up with a higher interest rate.
Thank you. And yield back.
Welcome again to the committee. Anybody who yields back is a rarity, and we're glad to have you.
I'm trying to get bonus points today. Thank you.
You just got them. Ms. Brooks, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I, too, like Congressman Messer, was a recipient of student loans, but one of the important part of my loan package in both undergrad and graduate school was work-study. And I'd like to talk a bit more about work-study. And, in fact, I was a work-study student in the financial aid office, which was an interesting place to be a work-study student, both in undergrad and in my first year of law school. But yet, I'm curious about what your thoughts are with respect, as we are all talking about reforming the student loan programs. Where should the discussion, there's been very little about work-study and the advantages of work-study, not only particularly for younger people, the time management skills, the actual working, the work experiences they can get. And so I'm curious what kind of, starting with you, Ms. Conklin, where are we with respect to work-study? And as you probably know, I have come from Ivy Tech Community College prior to running for Congress and coming here. And my other issue that I'm curious about with respect to the older students who have jobs, and as many of the community college students have jobs, how does work-study, where they don't have to repay a loan when you get a work-study type of grant, how does that work for those students who are working outside of school?
Mrs. Brooks, with all respect, actually our proposal did call for merging all of the different grant programs into one grant program. So in that sense, we were silent on work-study or explicit that we really think the extra dollars should go into Pell Grants. But I know that my colleagues at the table have thoughts about that, and so I defer to them.
The work-study program is not very well funded, and not very many students receive it. It's about 10% or a little bit more than the number of Pell Grant recipients. So if we really thought work-study was terrifically important and all Pell Grant recipients should have access to subsidized work on campus, we would have to dramatically increase the work-study program. That doesn't seem to be in the cards. Right now, as I said before, the funds are allocated to institutions in a sort of irrational way. And one of the things about work-study is, I mean, it's great for students to have jobs, but really many students are working much more than they could under work-study, and they need to earn more than they can under work-study. And so for them, this is earnings. They don't care that the federal government is paying part of the money. These are earnings, and I don't think that it should be considered part of what they're given to help them pay. This is what they're earning to help them get through, and they need other aid to meet their financial need.
I mean, we think that the federal work-study program has a lot of benefits and can really help a lot of students. I think that there are also a lot of ways that we can improve it. We can make it better targeted. We can make sure that it's actually going to students who need it the most. Right now, it's not always going to students who need it the most, and we can improve that formula. We think that it can go to schools based off of who they're serving and not necessarily based off of how long they've been in the work-study program, which is how the formula is set now. And we think it can go to schools that are providing programs to low and moderate income students who are actually getting really good skills and learning, basing their work off of also what they're studying at school. So there are definitely ways that we can improve this program and make it work even better.
I think I caught you saying that you got the work-study while you were going to law school?
I believe my recollection, I could be wrong on that. That was a long time ago.
So this brings up a really good point. The campus-based aid programs are available to graduate students. And there's not a lot of money to go around in the campus-based aid programs. And there are plenty of undergraduates who could benefit from work-study. Yet the federal government is providing work-study to graduate students, which seems like a really sort of the wrong set of priorities. Remember, these are students who already have an undergraduate degree. So you are essentially subsidizing people who already have an undergraduate degree. Secondly, work-study is means-tested, correct? You're providing a means-tested benefit to a graduate student. Does anybody know a graduate student who isn't poor? I mean, it's sort of a crazy concept to think we're going to have a means-tested program for people in graduate school. So I think that there are ways to reform the campus-based aid programs. One place to start is stop providing them to graduate students.
I'm curious, however, whether or not you all agree in the benefits of a work-study program, or are you opposed to work-study? I'm unclear. I heard some of you say that you believe that there are benefits to it, but I'm curious, rather than, increasing grants and loans and so forth, is there not a benefit to work study? And I'm curious why it was eliminated from your study, Ms. Conklin, just out of curiosity.
The gentlelady's time has expired, but we'd like the answer to that for the record, if we could.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Davis, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to all of you. You know, one of the things that you've mentioned, I think throughout the discussion, is that students need more information. We know that there should be more sophisticated databases and websites that students can go to, and I know there's been I think we've had some discussion of that here in the committee as well, something that's a little more foolproof, I think, and really cites the right metrics or that are important for students, that are agreed upon, kind of a universal consensus among schools. But I also get the feeling that there ought to be some other way of doing that. And do you have any ideas about that? And let me just share very quickly. I had a number of folks come to me the other day on veterans issues and veterans support within schools, universities, colleges, community colleges, et cetera. And there is a feeling that more education is needed to really understand how, whether it's the additional dollars that they're receiving as a result of being veterans or other means, that they don't have that information. And so it's very hard to really make good comparisons. Is that as big an issue as I think you've mentioned, but maybe that's not the focus of this discussion? How would you do that? Because one of their interests was in having a mandated course, maybe not even could be a full semester. If a university takes dollars, then they ought to be providing that in a way that students can get that information, where they have counselors on hand there. It's more than a website to be able to make those decent decisions. What do you think? I mean, is that something that, because certainly tuition is the bigger issue here, but we're not going to answer that question. I know universities are working on that when it comes to the total package that students are having to deal with.
So I agree that tuition is a huge issue, and investing in the aid programs up front is a huge issue. But obviously counseling and providing information is also a huge issue for students. I think that we were talking to students the other day, and one said, I'm studying biology, and I think this is going to get me the financial security I need, but I just don't know. She didn't have the information about her school, her program, the labor market where she was looking to go. And so, there are some websites out there, and there are some tools out there. They're not always great, or they're not always provided to students in ways that they know that they're out there. So I think it's really important to be thinking about, first of all, getting the kind of data that students need to make good decisions, providing it in a way that's clear for students and that students can also access very easily. There's a bill in the Senate that looks at how we can provide consumer-tested information to students, so we actually know when you're providing it in a certain platform, it actually works for that student, and they can understand their options. Ensuring that maybe if schools aren't providing the best outcomes, you can actually trigger a system where you provide more counseling to students, and they're required to provide more counseling. So I think there's a variety of ways to do it, but I think that including student feedback in that process is incredibly important.
Unfortunately, I don't think there's a foolproof method, but one thing is there are lots of websites out there that have sort of basic indicators and lots of information, and the sophisticated students go to those websites, and the students who really need the information don't. So we need to think beyond just the information. It would be helpful if we didn't focus so much on what do first-year graduates earn, because that's not really a very valuable piece of information for people to make choices. But there's a lot of information about how if you really want to get to students, if you send them a text message with a small amount of information, they will pay attention to it. Whereas if you put something complicated on a website, they won't. So we need to figure out not so much how to provide more information as how to provide it in ways that students can process it, and that the students who need it most will get personalized help to make decisions about the best course for them. And it's a risky investment. It's a great investment to go to school, but it's not going to pay off for everyone. And you can't know when you make a decision 100% that it's going to pay off.
So, Mrs. Davis, I think you've hit on a point of consensus among the community as well, that simplification by itself won't replace the need for good counseling. In our Doing Better by More students, you can find our recommendation that actually we want to see local, third-party, independent groups provide this counseling, that we cannot rely entirely on institutions to provide counseling about whether you should borrow and how much. That doesn't encourage that kind of good choice that we're looking for.
Yeah. Mr. DeLise, did you want to say something quickly?
Well, I just wanted to say that, one of the recommendations, that we put out, and there is some consensus around this, around making the income-based repayment program the only repayment option, or at least the automatic repayment option. And I think that's important when people are making decisions about what school to attend. Will this work out? Will I be able to make payments? To be able to tell them, well, your payments will automatically be calculated based on your income and the loan should be affordable. That should take a lot of pressure off on knowing what's available and how to make decisions.
Gentlelady's time has expired. Mr. Thompson.
Thank you, Chairman. Thanks for this hearing. We're talking today is about providing. We're talking about America's competitiveness, actually, in terms of making sure that folks have access to the education, so we have a qualified and trained workforce. I want to start out my first question, Mr. Dr. Baum or Mr. Delisle. One of the questions I often have is how we as policymakers can empower students to be good consumers in post-secondary education, in higher education. Whether it's a certificate program, whether it's associate degree, whether it's a 4-year, whether it's graduate studies. So beyond the tools currently available by the Department of Education, what recommendations could you make?
Well, one of the things, as I said before, is that I think that people really need personalized information so that they can make choices fitting their own circumstances. And that's a hard thing for the government to figure out how to provide, but they can fund third parties to provide better information, really understanding how students process that information. It's also true that students assume that if they're allowed to take their federal aid to an institution, that institution basically has the approval of the federal government. And the federal government should figure out how to make sure that it doesn't grant that approval to institutions that serve very few students well.
So there's a provision in federal law right now that requires colleges and universities to report the graduation rate of Pell Grant recipients, which is that's an important factor. That's an important piece of information that if I have a Pell Grant, I want to know how many people like me are going to graduate from this institution, except the universities and colleges don't comply with this rule, not very well. They bury the information, or they don't even know that they have to provide it. And so it would seem that there are places where the laws that are already on the books could essentially be beefed up, and the enforcement could be improved such that this information is made available. I think that's one example where we've already had those ideas. They just haven't been implemented effectively, and more attention needs to be given to them.
Okay, thank you. I would argue that we're measuring the wrong metric. It's success in life. It's where that education takes those folks to. It's not measuring graduation. Doesn't necessarily constitute success, nor being an ability to pay off loans. And but I do believe that I agree with the premise of we've got to do some measurements, but I don't think we're measuring the right things if we just stop at graduation rates. Ms. Conklin, I noticed that the group assembled by HCM had a lot of diverse perspectives on how best to improve student aid. I was curious, what were the guiding principles that led everyone to come together around the one loan and one grant proposal?
Thank you. So the coalition itself, the national leaders that I referenced some of them, they came together around 3 overarching principles and released their report in January. Simpler and more transparent aid, more innovation to promote lower cost options for today's students, and a shared responsibility for completion among states, students, and institutions. The technical panel of experts, some who had decades of experience with financial aid, some economists, former congressional staff were sitting at the witness table with me, sat around and said, now taking those guiding principles, how do we translate that into a set of specific recommendations? And so they advised the coalition, helped them come to that consensus on those 3 overarching principles, and then they tried to translate it, and that's the technical report you have in front of you.
All right, thank you. have about a minute left. I want to go back to Mr. Delisle. I'm interested in learning more about the streamlining of repayment options, including an idea out there to have student loan payments tied to income withheld automatically from the borrower's paychecks. Does income-based repayment plans have to be implemented that way, or are there other ways to do it?
So the income-based repayment plan that we have right now is not payroll withholding. It works like all the other repayment plans where you have to submit your payment. You can do that automatically through auto debit or something like that, but it does not come out of your paycheck like your income taxes. There are that may be doing payroll withholding may be a better way to collect payments, and that people sort of repay their loans somewhat inadvertently simply by working. But there are a lot of administrative challenges to doing that, and I would argue that the main hurdle to that, or the test on whether or not you can do that, is if that system is as easy or easier for the majority of borrowers.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Mr. Courtney, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Mr. Delisle, reading your somewhat scathing comments about graduate programs, graduate student programs, you know, I think you know, there's some valuable insight that we can take from that. There still though is a thing that nags me, which is that we know right now in the workforce, particularly in areas of healthcare, pediatric subspecialties, there are acute shortages in terms of making sure that we've got pediatric psychiatrists, you know, specialties up and down the profession. And if we were to eliminate Grad Plus, you know, as part of the greater good in terms of, you know, more efficient use of resources, as you've argued, and cap the amount under Stafford, and basically drive students into the private student loan market in terms of ways to fill the gap. You know, where does that leave the medical student who, again, wants to practice in an area where insurance payments are low, where, again, there's just huge obstacles in terms of trying to show an originator that you've got a really strong financial future, as opposed to another student at Yale, maybe in the same class, who's going to become an orthopedic surgeon in New York City. And so, you know, we've got a problem right now in terms of trying to staff up in critical professions. And where does your proposal leave us in terms of being able to meet those challenges?
So I don't disagree that that's a problem. But what you've done is you've created an income-based repayment program with loan limits and no caps on forgiveness that provides the benefits you're trying to target to a certain sector of workers in the economy to everyone.
No,
so that's essentially the
stipulate
issue.
To the fact that your, you know, larger proposal were to be enacted, where does that leave us in terms of trying to address these shortages?
So prior to 2006, I would argue that we had doctors. We had lots of doctors prior to 2006, right? And so people were able to go to medical school and they were able to partake in those types of jobs. But prior to 2006, there was no Grad Plus. Grad Plus is a very new program. So I think it is a fairly weak argument to say that we need it and the world would look very different if we didn't have it, even though it's just brand new.
I'm not arguing for preserving the status quo, you know, based on, you know, one discrete part of the workforce. I'm just saying we've got a problem in terms of one discrete part of the workforce, and if we basically are saying we're going to just let the private student loan market be the way that a student who wants to go into an area that's underserved and that is not highly compensated, you know, where does that leave our country in terms of being able to address those needs?
So you can borrow $20,500 a year in the Stafford program right now. You could increase that limit a bit, or where you think is appropriate, so that those people can borrow those loans. And I haven't proposed eliminating loan forgiveness in my proposal. It includes loan forgiveness. But for public service, I suggest limiting the amount that can be forgiven to around $30,000 to $40,000. for anybody that qualifies for public service. I don't think most people think that $40,000 in a government grant to have your loan forgiven is too little. And then the issue is you can still repay your loan using income-based repayment after you receive your public service loan forgiveness.
Okay, I would just say that I think it's important to understand the kind of professions I'm talking about are not public sector jobs. Okay, these are people who have private practices and who provide services for child agencies and are not sort of government employees. So to sort of say that I just think you need to think that through.
Well, but I didn't. But I have loan forgiveness in my proposal for them. They would receive loan forgiveness after 25 years of payment.
What you said was for public professions
and for non-public. And for there's loan forgiveness in current law.
Follow up on that because
that's current law.
We, in my opinion, can't just sort of accept the status quo in this area. We need to ramp up in terms of if you look at the graduating class of Yale's medical school and seeing where people are going, the costs and the challenges of financing are driving people away from parts of the profession where there's a critical need. I yield back.
Could I? Oh, I'm sorry. Could I just say I think public subsidies for the people you're talking about are totally appropriate. They should be targeted at those people. We should just give public subsidies to people for going into those occupations.
Well, I think that's, I guess that's a good idea. I mean, the problem is who decides, and that's, something that, we is sort of left out of some of the discussion that's being talked about here. So I yield back.
Mr. Andrews, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I want to enter your contest for a new name for non-traditional students. I would call them survivors. And I want to ask Ms. Conklin, you or anyone else on the panel, the following question. Let's take a woman who makes $30,000 a year, works full-time, and she has 2 children. And she has an associate's degree now, and her goal is to earn a bachelor's degree in accounting because she thinks she can make another $10,000 or $15,000 a year if she did that. Under the one grant, one loan idea, how much would she get if your idea were adopted, and how much does she get now? Let's say she's taking 2 courses per semester, because when you look at her full-time work and a full-time mom, that's about, she sleeps very little, but she takes 2 courses a semester. How does the proposal affect her?
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Andrews. I want to make sure I get this. So that's my mom. She made $30,000 a year. There were 2 of us. She had 3 jobs.
She was
and she was not she was not able to get back into school.
She was obviously a very good mom.
Thank you, sir. In the current system, that person gets a maximum Pell Grant probably as an independent student and gets 50% of the award because they're going approximately part-time at 2 courses. What we're proposing to do is to create, there are several options that lay out on the table. We are proposing one of 2 options. Without a doubt, we want the Pell Grant to value full-time attendance. And we want her to get out as soon as possible because she's losing that promotion that she could otherwise get if she has the bachelor's degree.
But you understand, full-time is not an option for her.
Okay, so actually, sir.
She has to pay the bills, so she, every waking hour she can take those 2 credits, that's it, or 2 courses.
You've absolutely asked the right question. The play for Congress is to get your grant and loan programs to value competencies and completion.
Right.
And what you can do, that woman, I would advise my mom, Western Governors University. Kids go to bed, full-time programs, self-paced, get your maximum award.
But with all due respect, she doesn't want to do that. She wants to go to Rowan University in my district and sit in a classroom. She doesn't want to go online. That's what she wants to do. If I read this proposal correctly, she gets less under your proposal than she does now, doesn't she?
No, sir. There's actually several ways to look at how to invest in that, and these are choices for Congress to make. We actually identify sufficient savings that she could actually get, that the maximum Pell Grant would go to $7,000, that you could afford to pay that with no new dollars. And so she would not receive any different benefit.
But she doesn't get the maximum Pell, does she, because she doesn't meet your...
No, but her average Pell would not change, sir, under this system, if you choose to reinvest savings because you've adopted this comprehensive set of simplification options.
Does she still qualify for the American Opportunity Tax Credit the way she does now? She can get $2,500 refundable now.
She would actually get up to $10,000 because we actually propose one lifetime learning tax credit. One tax benefit modeled on the lifetime learning tax credit up to $10,000.
But there's no limit on the tax credit now. She can get it every year, $2,500. Can't she? What's the limit now, Mr. DeLisle?
I believe it's 4 years.
So she's limited to 10 now?
No, I believe that the number of years you could claim the AOTC is 4 years, but also the AOTC expires in a few years.
Well, that's a different question, but can anybody tell me definitively whether she's better off under the new proposal or the old one?
I haven't heard anybody propose cutting any of the reform proposals involve cutting the aid that a student like that would receive. It's very clear that there are many students who have to enroll part-time. They get Pell Grants now. They should continue to get Pell Grants, and those Pell Grants should be funded as generously as we can manage to fund them.
And I understand this is a conceptual proposal, but we don't legislate concepts. We legislate statutes, and they have real impact on real people. And the one thing I'm alarmed in reading this is this. Look, I think people should finish as quickly as they can. But my concern here is for people for whom full-time going to school is not a viable option. Does this proposal penalize them? A yes or no?
No proposal that I'm aware of here penalizes those students. No one proposes making a cut in the grant that a half-time student would receive.
So she would get the same that she does now or more?
If you elect to make the other changes to simplification we recommend, which generate savings, which can be reinvested in a larger Pell Grant, and then she gets exactly the same award.
And just real quick, I mean, I can't speak to Ms. Conklin's proposals, but I do appreciate the question because I think it raises a really important point, which is proposals that look at bringing students up from, say, 12 credits to 15 credits, and how can we encourage people to go full-time or change the definition of that. They offer real drawbacks to students like that. They may not be able to take more classes because they have kids. They may not actually be able to take more credits because their school can't offer those credits because their school is underfunded. So I think those are really important questions to be asking as we're thinking about that.
I appreciate the answers. I just say to the chair before I yield back that I think this goes to her point. The so-called traditional student is a minority these days. The majority of students are the people that we're talking about in this line of questioning. I think this committee wants to be very, very vigilant that someone in that position is not disadvantaged in any way. I think you do too. I yield back.
Mr. Polis, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate the time and appreciate you and Chairman Klein doing this hearing. At a time when college degrees are increasing in importance, we need to make sure that students have more information about their options and an easier way to repay their loans when they've completed their degree. Right now, there's 7 options that borrowers select when entering repayment. Even worse, the default option is very rarely the best. In fact, the most expensive at a time when their income is the lowest, likely to be the lowest and least flexible. Appreciated Ms. Mishry's remarks that said that many haven't even heard of some of the better options that might be available, including income-based repayment. Students would benefit tremendously from a simpler way to repay their student loans as the default without having to worry about managing complicated paperwork and needlessly missing a payment. That's why I've introduced the Excel Act along with Congressman Petri, who asked a few questions earlier. I believe that's a strong step in the right direction towards a more flexible, student-centered, and success-centered financial aid system. Under the Excel Act, students would pay back their loans on a simple income contingent basis. Payment obligation is 15% of a borrower's income starting above 150% of the poverty line until the loan is repaid. It has strong borrower protections, so our neediest students would be paying 0% when they're out of college. My first question for Ms. Mishry is, like the student you described in your testimony, I speak with many students in Colorado who are very frustrated by our complicated, often unforgiving student aid system. As you mentioned, the survey your organization conducted found 89% of respondents agreed or strongly agreed with being enrolled in an income-based repayment program. How can streamlining a system of automatic and universal income-based repayment help students navigate the complicated student aid system and avoid defaulting on debt?
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think it can do a lot. I think that it can ensure that students, as they're leaving school, perhaps facing a tough economy as they have in the last few years, and struggling to figure out their next step, really be able to manage those payments and manage a system that's otherwise been complex. I think one important point to make is that when you are in an income-based repayment program, you can pay more, so you can pay it down faster. So if that makes sense for you, then you can go ahead and do that. And so we want to...
So it empowers a student, if they want to pay even up to the amount they would under the 10-year repayment program if they want to. Just like you can pay down your credit bill early, you can, if you want to, pay it down.
That's right. Yeah, and so
you
we
get
would...
The, one more point. You get the advantages, to be clear, you get the advantages of the 10-year repayment program and the flexibility to do that if you want, with additional flexibility to pay less if you so choose. Is that correct?
That's right.
I'm sorry.
Yes.
I was just going to also point out that another advantage is that with the discussion of these Oregon programs, if we had a program like the one you've proposed or others here have proposed in place and everyone knew about it, we wouldn't have individual states trying to develop programs that loan students all this money and don't tell them that it's a loan.
And I appreciate Ms. Mishri's point in that last one, that this gives students the option to pay less, but if they choose to, they can actually do the same 10-year program, which is the default now. Next question for Mr. Delisle. I'd like you to address the most needy borrowers, those who stand to benefit the most from affordable access to quality education. You mentioned that subsidized Stafford loans don't always provide low-income students with the greatest benefits, and of course there's a tranche of students just outside of the eligibility that of course rely on student loans, might go into, depending on their degree, lower and middle paying jobs. How do you feel about the simplified universal system of income-based repayment? How do you feel that can be more effective when it comes to serving the students who are most in need and most at risk?
Well, it does a better job of the current system because it's essentially looking at what their income is when they leave school and setting their payment based on that. You mentioned the subsidized Stafford. We have a subsidized Stafford loan. We have an unsubsidized Stafford loan. This is part of the confusion I was talking about earlier. The subsidized Stafford loan has this interest rate benefit, has an interest benefit where the interest doesn't accrue while the borrower is in school. So, but that, again, is a benefit that they are receiving based on their family's income when they enter school. And an income-based repayment program targets benefits based on their income when they're out of school, which makes much more sense. The other sort of complicating thing is that those benefits can sometimes cancel one another out. You can only earn one. You can only get the benefit from income-based repayment and not the subsidized Stafford, even though you have it nominally. And that's an example where we've got just too much overlap and complexity in the program.
And you think more simplicity would work to the benefit of the students?
Absolutely.
I thank the chair lady, and I yield back the balance of my time.
And the gentleman made an unmitigated commercial for his and Mr. Petri's bills. You're very good. That's why we know you came from the private sector. Mr. Desjardins.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and I thank the witnesses. A problem that we've seen evolving over the past couple of decades is the amount of time it takes for students to complete college degrees. Oftentimes, it used to be 4 years, a 16-credit hour was standard. Now kids are actually being sold prices for a 12-credit hour, which graduates them in 5.5 and maybe 6 years. So we're not getting people into college and back out into the workforce in a timely fashion. I think one great way to lessen costs for college students and taxpayers is to graduate students in as timely a manner as possible while still making sure they gain knowledge and appropriate skills to excel in the economy. I know in my district back in Tennessee, Bridgestone North America and Motlow Community College, along with local stakeholders, created a program, in this case a mechatronics program, in which high school students can gain college credit and technical credentials while gaining real-world work experience. Mrs. Conklin, if you wouldn't mind, can you talk about programs like dual enrollment, credentialing, and competency-based education?
I can, but can I give a shout out to Tennessee first?
You can. Is this another infomercial?
This is.
Lady?
So HCM since 2010 has led a state reform network that Lumina Foundation supports called Strategy Labs. Tennessee's a superstar in it. And the reason why I say this is that they are the only state with an outcomes-based funding formula that rewards all of the state subsidy to institutions based on how well they do improving outcomes for students, particularly most disadvantaged students. by having such clear few metrics, again, a simple system that's incentive-based around success. They have one of the best in the nation policies around prior learning assessment. They have a growing appetite for competency-based education and a way to fund that through their premium on completion, not on courses completed, not on courses attempted, not on students enrolled. They are seeing they're seeing faculty and presidents kind of analyze the data, embrace data analytic techniques in ways that really we see at scale and we want to embrace. So, and then again, I would say, kind of bringing back into Mr. Andrews' question, the Tennessee Tech Centers have completion rates that are so far above the national average, and it's because they have a structured cohort program. And so, indeed, the way they approach structure is actually great for non-traditional students, and they do well under this outcomes-based funding formula. Now, on dual enrollment, we, in this technical panel report, didn't speak directly to it, but dual enrollment is indeed, if the courses that you take in high school count for college completion, it is a way to reduce the cost of college. If you are a student in an early college high school, for instance, where you can, in high school, earn an associate's degree, you can save 50% on your associate's degree. So it's a phenomenal option. But again, that's a state pathway, and that's why I come back to Tennessee and recognizing where the role of state leadership in our nation's college attainment problem.
I appreciate that, and if you need more time to brag on Tennessee, you're welcome to take it. But I would just ask, how can we encourage students to spend less time in school and more time building their skill sets in the workforce?
Well, one of the things I think that we have to understand is that students are a very diverse group of people, and it used to be that most students were young, full-time, traditional-age students. That has, for a long time, not been the case, and we can't expect that the single mother of two children is going to be able to progress through a program at the same rate that someone with fewer responsibilities can, but we have to help them to select the right programs. And all of these ways of making it possible for people to do multiple things at the same time or to get credit for things they already knew are important, but we have to be very, very careful about making sure that students get a quality education, that they really learn something with the process of getting their degree, and that we aren't just handing out pieces of paper to students.
Thank you. Does anyone else have anything to add?
I mean, one way is to make sure that we're supporting our aid programs and ensuring that we're investing in things like the Pell Grant that allow students to go to school and maybe work a few hours less because they're able to actually attend school and pay their bills.
Amy Lightman in our office at the Numeric Foundation has done a lot of work around the credit hour and competency-based education. And she's done a very good job of pointing out that the way the federal student aid programs are structured is they essentially endorse a system that is based on the credit hour, and it makes it very difficult for institutions to do something different. But there are ways in existing statutes, such as the experimental sites, where institutions can come up with different ways to provide federal aid that is not necessarily based on these standard delivery models. But I think it's really important for the committee to realize that when you make these rules and the way the laws get written, if you are sort of codifying an educational system of today and not allowing for the flexibility that we want to be there is problematic.
I thank the panel for their perspective, and I yield back.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank again our witnesses for taking the time to testify before the committee today. I realized that when I made my remarks, I did not properly thank you, and I will correct that now. And also thank you on behalf of the chairman, who had another obligation. I'd like to see if Mr. Hinojosa has any closing remarks.
Yes, thank you. In closing, I thank our expert witnesses for sharing their views on how the federal government can simplify the federal financial aid process in order to lower costs and improve access to higher education. I think that your presentation was excellent, and we thank you for that. While I applaud President Obama and Secretary Duncan for working to make college costs more transparent, I believe that Congress and the federal government must make student loan repayment options easier for students and families to navigate and understand. As this committee moves forward to reauthorize the Higher Education Act, I intend to continue to explore ways in which Congress can simplify the federal student aid process and ensure that students and families fully understand their funding options. I plan to introduce an innovative amendment when we go to marking up this legislation as part of reauthorization of Higher Education Act. That amendment will require that the financial literacy education program for high school students and their parents include this new component, which informs and teaches them about the new improved federal student college financial aid that we have been discussing here this morning, so they can make better choices for their family. And with that, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Hinojosa. I have realized as a result of this hearing today and perhaps some of the other discussions that we've had, but particularly in this one, I think that I am really a failure because it took me 7 years to get my undergraduate degree. And we're so focused now on completion. It's obviously a failure if you take more than 4 years or even more than 6 years to get your degree. But I appreciate the comments that have been made today. I will make just a couple of brief comments. Dr. Baum, I appreciated very much what you said about the fact that if we focus on one student, and I think Mr. Andrews gave a great example of that, if you focus on only one student and the impact of change on a particular student, it's very difficult to move forward. And I think that has been a real problem in terms of making changes that need to be made in this area. And again, I appreciate the fact that Mr. Andrews gave the example, I think, that you were pointing out in your comments. I also appreciate your saying that we need to really emphasize that students should be getting a degree that is useful to them or skills that are useful to them when they graduate. We focused on many different things today. We focused on inputs. We focused on getting students the information. But in other hearings, we have focused on that area. And so I appreciate your bringing that up. We realize this issue of loans and debt and financial aid become an even greater issue when 53% of the students who've recently graduated have not been able to get jobs. Ms. Mashuri mentioned the terrible economy, and of course some of us think that the economy has suffered tremendously because of policies that have been implemented in recent years. I am concerned, though, about another issue, Dr. Baum, that you brought up, and that is if students going to college or in college cannot understand from websites on the campus and the colleges what it is that's happening, what about the completion rates, what about loans and all that. I'm not sure but they can understand it from a text message. I'm not sure what that's saying about our college population these days. How much simpler can we make things? And maybe we need to look at who's being admitted to college if they can't understand the information. And what you continue to talk about, the obligation of the federal government to have the material out there that they can understand. But very little's been said about the obligation of the student to understand what's out there. So anyway, I want to thank all of you for being here today. I think we've all learned a lot, and the committee is now adjourned.